Hello guys, today is Sunday, I believe it's 30th of August today, and just wanted to make a short video about how money works, right? And why am I doing this is because quite often I see that people simply do not understand the basics, like the very basics which they should have been taught, well, maybe in some university, and the problem is that it's not the normal guys. I mean, that they're the ones who get pretty much BS'd too, right? It's a lot of this BS I hear from journalists, like magazines, online stuff, and things like this, right? And what it comes to my mind is that, like, look, guys, it's just the conversation I had with some people who were telling about how great the American and other education systems are, where this BS comes from, and how that's making it so expensive that only the rich or the stupid can afford it. That means that removing all the intelligent people out of the system, how was it a great idea? So the stuff I want to talk about is, recently came up across something online about Jeff Bezos, or whatever his name properly is pronounced, like the guy who founded Amazon, right? And a lot of people go like, hey, Jeff Bezos has made like $400 billion in the last 6 months. And I was like, that can't be right? It's like, why is it they're writing it? And I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, cool, how much? So I start looking, and we're talking about online, I'm saying, okay, how much did Jeff Bezos' money did he make? And you see the same article coming out from, we're talking like New York Times, Business Insider, Business something else, and so a whole bunch of really kind of high up newspapers and magazines we should be able to trust, or we should be able to say, okay, New York Times writes that this guy has like $200 billion, and you go like, oh shit, okay, cool. And you read through this, and it seems like, okay, yeah, they write, look, every month he was making so many $1 billion, and you go like, okay, so, and almost nowhere does it say how did this happen, right? Just says that he made so much money, and you go, okay, cool, but the only thing we know about Jeff Bezos is he owns just over 50% of shares in Amazon, right? He doesn't seem to have many other businesses. So, okay, if we look at the Amazon profits, we can say that there's no way that Amazon has made good, $600-700 billion in profits. It didn't post it anywhere, right? So how did Jeff Bezos make so much money, and why is it that these magazines are writing these? It was like, well, actually what they're writing is that the shares that Jeff Bezos owns in the Amazon, because the Amazon shares have gone up in price so much, right? Because obviously over the last few months, over the last few years, let's be honest about this, the governments, the consecutive governments, like every consecutive financial minister in pretty much every developed country in the world would print tons of money, and they'll just whack them to where it matters the least, into the markets, specifically in the share trading markets and financial markets, but none of this money actually hit the street. That is why our general inflation is not really as high as it might have been if that money actually did hit the street. But it didn't go into real economy, it went into the financial markets. And this means that people that trade in financial markets have all of a sudden got billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, euros, pounds, rubles, grivnas, whatever else, right? to basically buy up shares. So now we see a huge rise in the price of the share. So they say, look, Jeff Bezos is worth like $400-500 billion. So, and they say, okay, this means that he has got $400-500 billion. Guys, what are you smoking? Why is it that the journalists in Financial Times and Business Insider in New York Times all write this bullshit? Why is it that the people who actually, like, whatever they call, who reductors, whatever they're called, I don't remember, the word slipped my mind. But why did all these people allow this bullshit to be printed, right? I mean, just because the shares that he owns from a company which have gone up in price because there's been a lot of tons and tons of money dumped into that market, why do we say that he has actually got so many hundred billions of dollars, which he does not, okay? Right? It's a simple thing to look at. Is most of us still have, well, some of us still have got parents, most of us have still got parents, some of us have got grandparents, somebody is still younger, somebody is already a grandparent. But if we look at the more senior generation, right? People who were capable of buying a house in 1980s, 1990s, right? When the house costed like 30 grand and their wage was 25, versus now when the house is worth 3 million and your wage is still 25 grand, right? So, but these people's houses, many of them have gone up in price, okay? And this means that technically all those people are millionaires, right? Because they're worth $1 million, $2 million, euros, pounds, depending. Obviously not in every area, but in many areas. So like take, for example, London, take a few others, right? But you don't think to yourself, coming to your grandma and saying, hey grandma, why don't you give me $500,000? Do you? Why? Because you understand that your grandma doesn't have $500,000. Her house might be worth $1 million. Right? But it's worth $1 million because there is a bunch of yappies, right, who have made their money God knows how, is willing to take out $1 million or pounds, well, $1 million more worth of a mortgage to buy a house which is essentially really still worth 100 grand. Right? Same thing happens here, right? Jeff Bezos does not have $400-500 billion, okay? He has the shares, right, like a house, which is worth that. But if he sells those shares, if he starts selling them en masse, guess what's gonna happen? The cost of the shares is gonna drop. People gonna panic. Why is it that Jeff Bezos is selling his shares in Amazon, right? And all of a sudden his entire worth is gonna drop down thousands of times, because right now one Amazon share is worth $2,000, okay? Just think about it, right? One piece of paper is worth 2,000 pieces of paper, right? That's how his worth is identified. And all the journalists that are writing that Jeff Bezos has got $400 billion are talking shit. They are fucking imbeciles. And the fact that they're still allowed to write in these big newspapers tells to me two things. Number one, the people who run that magazine have all of a sudden gone from somebody intelligent 5-6 years ago to a complete fucking imbeciles. or they just making this shit up just to make sure people get shocked. Like, like the louder it sounds, the more papers it sells, right? Or they are actually intentionally creating those situations to make more pressure on digital businesses, which are putting their old style businesses out of fucking business. Whichever way it happens, but we seem to have lots of bullshit coming out from the media, a lot of the media, right? That's why they're called fake media, who tell you that this guy has 100 billion. No, he does not. These are the very basics, and these are the basics we need to understand. We need to understand that somebody who owns a house which is valued at £1 million or euros or dollars, right, does not have that amount in his bank. Very much like if somebody owns a company that is quite often might be valued at 2, 3, 4, 5 million or billion, whichever one you choose, still does not have that amount in his bank. Okay? I'm just going to give you another example. A few years back, I had my windscreen cracked on one of my cars, right? Which since then has died. But the windscreen, to repair windscreen, I had to go to a windscreen replacement company. And I went to the company and I spoke to the guy who owned the company. He was one of the guys swapping my windscreen out. And as we had this conversation about money, he admitted that he is technically worth over £3 million, which is at that time was close to $5 million. And this evaluation was built on the fact that his company, which all it did was simply swap windscreens in one place, by itself was valued at about £1 million something. And he had 2 properties which he has bought during the 1980s, right, when he was starting the company and he had the money. And he bought those properties at something like 30 grand a pop back then. But because of where the properties were based at the time, one of them being in US, California, the price of these properties has gone up from like 30 grand to like £1 million plus, right? That's how he was valued at over £3 million, yet all he had in his bank account was like 10 grand spare money if he just if something went wrong. Right, because his company, although it had like constant income, it also required money to be spent, and obviously it was not making him more than so much money, right? Obviously, he had kids and he had his wife and he had grandchildren, so he had some places to spend the money, but it wasn't an ultra high amount. It just was a steady amount. And his company was valued at that much because people buy cars and cars have broken windscreens, and because of that, because it's a steady income stream, it was valued at that much. Okay? Same thing, that guy could not just take out, $1 million quid, as they said in English. He couldn't take out £1 million and just give it to his children. Because just the valuation of the company would not mean that he actually got the money. Same thing with Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, or was it Bill Gates, or a bunch of other people which are now said to be he is worth like hundreds of billions, right? He's worth he's worth that much, and then you go like, yeah, wait a minute, is he worth, or does he have that money? We have to remember that Bill Gates, for all his things he wants to do, he continuously sells the shares of Microsoft. He does not just take the money, he does not have the money. He has to sell to Microsoft shares to do something else. He obviously has some profit from those shares, but if he wants to do big money injections, he has to sell the shares. Okay? Right? Let's stop that BS. Right? About how that the person has got the money because the newspaper said he's valued at that much, because that's a BS. Right? So, okay guys, I hope that helps, and I hope you kind of continue just learning a bit new things every time instead of trusting the papers, because they're full of BS which is written by completely incompetent imbeciles. Thank you very much. Have a good night.